Vi har en frokostavtale med Nick Broomfield som bor her.
Ja.
Så hvor har dere den frokosttalen hen?
Oppe i andre etasje.
Ja. Good morning, Nick. Nice to see you. Nick Broomfield, you are visiting Fredrikstad because of the Nordic Doc Festival.
Right.
Yes, and I have been reading about you on Wikipedia. And they say that you are celebrated, famous, and also controversial. And in the sense that you are sued sometimes, and you have also had problems with some of your films to get them distributed. And so I'm thinking, are you considering yourself a rebel and a political activist?
I think very early on I decided that I would always tell the story that I found, even if it wasn't the most popular story with everybody, but that I wanted to tell an honest story, and I always felt that I had almost a kind of pact with the audience that I would go as far as I could with it. And so sometimes that gets you into trouble. But all my films have been kind of released and so on. And I think ultimately if you go deep into things, they always are political. There always is politics, and I think it's when the emotions of everyday relationships take on some kind of a wider political significance that they become obviously very interesting and relevant to lots of other people, which is probably your audience who watch things. So I think it's good if you can, as an artist, to take things to that point where people can relate to things in a cultural and political way to the things that you made films about.
But you have also been accused of seeking sensations and kind of being partial conspiratorial. But then I saw Whitney, Can I Be Me?
Right.
Your latest film, just the other day, and I was kind of surprised because that is kind of a nice and mild film, even though Whitney had a sad destiny. You know, she died, but still you are very, very nice to her. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened during that film? Did you fall in love with her?
Yeah, I think I probably did fall in love with her. I mean, you never know what you're going to feel when you go into a film. I'm not one of those filmmakers who has a thesis of something they want to say. And I think what you try and do is make a film about what you find. And the film, in a way, is the research that you are reporting to the audience. And I found her to be this kind of very obviously charismatic but funny and kind person who was very concerned that people around her were happy and incredibly generous to a fault. There were so many people living kind of off her. She had an enormous entourage of family and friends, sort of about maybe more than 50 people that she was supporting. And by supporting, she was buying them cars and houses and paying for the schooling and all the rest of it. So I think all that just became an enormous weight. But in making the film, I was just, you really identify with what she was going through, I think. As well as all the pressure of just being Whitney Houston, which I think was, you never really have a moment to yourself.
In some of your other films, you are very visible yourself in the film,
Right.
with your earphones and so on.
Yeah.
And in the Whitney Houston film, We Don't See You at All. Is this a change in the way you want to film?
Well, not really. I mean, I've made lots of different kinds of films. I mean, I've made fiction films too, which obviously I don't appear in. But, you know, when I started, I was doing much more, I guess, traditional cinema verite films, you know, much more in the same kind of school as, you know, Fred Wiseman or Don Pennebaker or Richard Leacock, that kind of film, which, you know, which are films that I still love, you know, which are very much no commentary, just letting scenes play, long takes, that sort of thing. I mean, I love those films. So I started that way, and then I kind of put myself in the films because a couple of films went quite wrong, and my way of rectifying that was to kind of make a diary or a story of the making of the film, which I think was, you know, was an interesting device. And it was obviously new when I started it. No one else was doing it. So that's always fun when you're doing something new and you don't know how it is. And then, of course, at a certain point you do know too well, because although you're making different subjects, you're kind of using the same technique. So Whitney was kind of a welcome change in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, Tales of the Grim Sleeper, which is the film before Whitney, I already am much less in the film, and the people in that film are much more the stars of the film. It wasn't like my film. But with Whitney, it was a real relief not to be in it at all.
But some of the films where you do appear quite a lot,
Yeah.
it looks to me that your way of working is kind of a participatory observation, you know, more like a social anthropologist way of working. Have you kind of been studying that kind of scientific works? Because it really looks like that's what you're doing.
Well, Colin Young, who was my professor at the National Film School, his favorite kind of films were anthropological films. So I think he was very influential, because we obviously looked at a lot of those films, and he always felt that there was a kind of absurd wall between the filmmakers and the subjects. The filmmakers are always pretending they're not there, but they're obviously there, and they have a relationship, and he always felt that relationship needed to be acknowledged and needed to be addressed in some way, and that if the audience had more information about who was making the film, they would be able to decide more for themselves as to how much the filmmaker was influencing things, or, you know, they would at least know who was making the film. So obviously you don't want to have that in every film, but I think it is an interesting dimension, you know, that, because you can't just sort of say to people, oh, get on and pretend I'm not here, which is, you know, because you obviously are there, and it's because of the relationship you have with the people in your film that they're either comfortable or not, or, you know, so you obviously have a very big effect. And I think by being in some of the films, it was an acknowledgement of that, as well as kind of making a diary, you know, a kind of diary of the making of the film.
And it's also very fascinating to follow you in that process.
Well,
For
I
me,
hope so.
as a viewer,
Right.
it's very fascinating. I'm also wondering, what do you think about what kind of things can you do with the film as a media compared to literature, theater, you know, any other kinds of media?
Well, I
What's
think,
the strong thing about film?
I think not only does film have the ability of reaching a much bigger audience, but also it has this unique thing of kind of real time, which is if you shoot, say, 10 minutes of film without a cut, everything that happens within that 10 minutes is in real time. So you don't have that in literature, you don't have that in any other art form. And what is so incredible, I think, sometimes is to see the behavior of people and the way they relate to each other. And sometimes you can film an event in one take. Obviously, that's amazing with a performer, for example, like Whitney, but also, you know, if you're filming in a prison and suddenly the situation changes from somebody getting a food tray to a fight, film has the ability of showing that transition, which you can't, it's very hard to describe in literature or other things. So that was another thing that, you know, my professor Colin Young was so interested in, was this notion of real time. So I think if you could, that's why I like to have long takes in my films, because I think it gives you an incredible privileged look as to how it would be to be there inside a situation. You know, you obviously film doesn't have smell, but it has the real ability to describe the feel of a place, to put you, it's the next closest thing to being there yourself.
So this is about the camera leading. I think you do put some, of course, importance into that, but you are not having the camera yourself. You use cameramen?
Yeah, well, I do, and often camera women. But I did start shooting myself, but then I was working with someone called John Churchill that I made many of my early films with.
Yes.
And she was just so much better than I was. She'd filmed a lot of films, and she'd made this long series called The American Family, which had been shot over like a year or two, and every day she was shooting for a year, just putting massive amounts of film through the camera. So she was totally fluent with the camera in a way that I simply was not. So I reluctantly moved to doing sound. It wasn't something that I wanted to do, but anyway, so I tried to make a virtue of that, you know. And yeah, I think shooting those films is really difficult. I think it's the most difficult kind of filming, because you can't get people to do things twice.
No.
You either catch it or you don't. And you don't want to be sitting like miles back with a very wide frame. And so if, you know, someone like Joan Churchill had this sort of sixth sense as to what was happening in the room. She was very sensitive to the dynamics and the chemistry of the relationship between the people she was filming. So she had this incredible ability to be on the right person, even if it was the reaction to what was happening. And also the technical ability to kind of hit focus at the end of a zoom. And she was just fluent. And I simply couldn't do that, you know.
Because in Biggie and Tupac, you actually are commenting the camera work. You have someone just coming in because your normal cameraman or woman was busy.
Right.
So, and the camera is flowing everywhere,
Right.
I remember, and you said, wow, you know, but still you keep it there and you use it, and it's the long take, as you said, on the other hand.
Well,
and,
I think you just have to, it was a kind of comedic situation, because it was a maximum security prison, but they were kind of insisting that everybody puts their address down in the visitor book at the prison. So any American people didn't really want to put their addresses in the prison log, because they were frightened of the people we were filming. So it was fine for me, because I was living in England, so I just put an English address. But Joan Churchill, for example, who lived in Los Angeles, did not want to put her address. So she wasn't going to be around that day. And the person who took over had told me that they had filmed in a prison before. What they didn't tell me was that it was an empty prison, and yeah, exactly, and then they were crazy when they went. I remember we were going into the prison, and we also had to sign another form, which said that if we were taken hostage, in the unlikely event we were taken hostage, that the prison guards would have the right to shoot our knees out.
Wow.
I guess to incapacitate you, so you then have to be dragged around by the prisoners. And I sort of signed, but I noticed this camera person who hadn't been in prison before really, kind of looked very apprehensive as he signed that thing. And I guess, you know, he was young, but I just thought it was important to make that part of the story.
As you said, you are British, and but you have filmed quite a lot in America.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you experience any kind of cultural differences that is a challenge for you?
Well, not really. I mean, I think when I first went to America, people didn't understand me. You know, particularly in, I think the first film we did in America, it's John Churchill and myself, was maximum security prison for juveniles at a place called Chino. And it was mainly, poor black and Latino kids. And they didn't understand anything that I was saying, being English. They thought I was really weird. So I guess I tried to talk in a more of an American way so that they could at least understand me.
About young people, a lot of young people have this dream or ambition to really be famous, be the greatest filmmaker, documentary maker. Do you have good advice for young people who really want to start?
Well, obviously, I think it's more like going to boot camp, making a film. It's really, I mean, it's very unglamorous making documentaries, and I always think, it's like I always wear the same white T-shirt. Well, I buy 7 white T-shirts, 7 pairs of underpants, 7 socks. So you only have to go to the laundrette once a week, and otherwise you're just kind of like in boot camp, pretty much, on the shoot of a film, and they're very intense and hard work. And I think you kind of fall in love with, or I did. I mean, obviously you're fascinated in the film you're making, but there's so many different ways of telling a story, and I guess you refine an approach, and you become more and more fluent, hopefully, in telling stories in different ways. And every story you tell is kind of like a riddle, is like solving it, how you're going to tell that story, what approach you're going to take, or what how you're going to present that to an audience and keep them interested and so on. So I think you become interested in those kinds of things, rather than I'm going to be the most famous filmmaker, which is not something that probably lasts.
No, but so much part of our culture is about that 15 minutes of fame, and people get influenced by it. But you have told a lot of stories about famous people, like Courtney Love, Sarah Palin, and things. So I'm wondering, are you planning making a film about Trump?
No, I couldn't stand that. I think it would be such a sad year.
Yes.
I'd hate to give a year of my life to Donald Trump. And I don't think I've made that many films about famous people. I mean, most of the films I've made are about, I would say, underprivileged people that most people have never heard of.
Yes.
Whether it's Eileen Wuornos or the people in South Central Los Angeles, or even the people I filmed in South Africa and so on. They're all people that most people have never heard of at all. And so I think the Biggie and Tupacs, Kurt and Courtney, Whitney are kind of the exception, really.
Yeah. Because all those people, the normal people you are mentioning, they are people living on the outskirts of the community. And through them, you are telling this story, not only about these people, but also about the community. And I find that you are pointing on very important things, you know, about, you point out corruption and police misusing their power and things like that. Are you looking for the personal story, or is it the community, the bigger story, or is it just two sides of the same course?
I think part of it, part of storytelling, is that you need to find somebody, some person that you like, that you believe in, that has a charisma, that has a warmth and that an audience is going to identify with, that will lead them through the story. You know, so if you just do a film about an issue, it's not that interesting. I mean, you might as well write an article, which would be a much more efficient way of doing it. So you often, with a documentary, you kind of cast it in a way, or you, putting it in a simpler way, is you put the people in it that you relate to, you being the filmmaker, you know, that you like, that you find amusing, that you empathize with in some way, that you're kind of fascinated by. So that's obviously probably every, if you had 5 filmmakers or 5 storytellers, they'd probably tell it in a completely different way. But I always think you need to find someone that you kind of like, that has something about them that you're fascinated by, and you just get, you know, as you get deeper into them, you also get deeper into their world and the particular issue that you're, like in Grim Sleeper, there's this woman Pam who had been on crack and had been working on the streets for years, but she was so funny, and she was such an amazing storyteller herself, and so charismatic, and so interesting, you know, and so intelligent. And so it was wonderful to be able to ride around with her and see her world through her eyes, you know.
Yeah, I saw a lot of those scenes, and I like the chemistry between you two, because it's like you say. I think we have been talking a lot, and there are more things on the program, on the festival. So I would just say very much thank you. It was a very nice conversation, and good luck with other projects.
Well, thank you.
Even though it's not Trump.
And you too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.